We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and the only thing I like better than an eggplant burger is a chocolate-covered eggplant burger. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's live-action cartoon adaptation month, and this week we are talking the 2002 film Scooby-Doo. My name is Chris Logan, and I'm joined, as always, by my best pal, Andrew Williams.
Really,
All
Chris? Right. That's so nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reference to the movie, but you're
I
pretty good,
get it. Fine. All right.
All right, you ready to jump into this one, Andrew? Yet another 1960s cartoon adaptation.
Folks, I really want to stress, we did not anticipate or plan that they were all going to be from the 60s. Like, we literally agonized over what cartoon movies were going to be part of this month, and we settled on the ones, and then it was literally during the last episode that it occurred to us they were all cartoons from the 60s. Like, our realization on that episode is a real-time moment of like, oh, I guess we did that.
As we were arguing all month what to actually call the theme, and 1960s cartoon adaptations was right there the whole time.
The whole time.
Well, what's your history with this one, Andrew? The 2002 Scooby-Doo movie. It's one you caught in theaters, saw a lot growing up, and are you a big Scooby-Doo fan overall?
When it comes to this movie, I've got almost no experience. I'm sure I saw it at some point, especially later when you kind of realize James Gunn wrote it and you just get curious. But I had no memories of it. I had no attachment to it. I'm not trying to be backhanded, but this is just not a movie I thought about a lot. I'm pretty sure I saw it at some point, but that may also not be true. I genuinely may have watched this for the first time today. But I do love the franchise overall. It's actually, it's one of those comfort things for me, to a huge degree. The first time I ever got a DVR, this is, dating me back as nobody even uses those anymore now. I set it to record all the original episodes of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The original, and would watch those all the time. I love watching the movies, the animated movies. They churn 2 or 3 out a year. It feels like it's just a tried and true formula, and I know what I'm getting, and I like the characters. And there's never a moment where it's not what it's supposed to be. Arguably, until I watch this #PP. And they do change it up sometimes. There is that formula, but they did a show many years ago called Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated that was it was 2 26-episode seasons. And it was very much a serial story for the first time in possibly ever. They did a genuine this is an ongoing. So you had your kind of monster of the week stuff, but then you had this building background story. I've probably talked about this before, but you had previous versions of Mystery Inc. that were around, including a previous generation, and then kind of this big prophecy comes into play. So there is this bigger story in the back of something that is real, but it is highlighted by week-to-week stories where we're still doing that same formula. And I like that one a lot. So Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated is one that I really, really like. But so a huge attachment to the franchise in general. And I guess I have to give a shout out to possibly the best version, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, which that's another one that I watch endlessly all the time.
Now, what's the hook of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo? That name sounds familiar, but
is younger, so they're all kids.
Okay, I think.
But the hook is essentially the same, but they're just kids instead of adults. And your brain is probably no, but The humor is funny. It's not really watered down. If anything, it's probably a little bit more edgy than the original.
It sounds like
cartoons
Tiny
were,
Toon Adventures.
but it's not. Like, it's very much like there's a self-awareness.
Well, I meant that in
like
a good way.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
I like
guess.
Tiny Toons.
Right, Tiny Toon. But like, even the approach isn't really that. It is this very different thing. There's tons of running gags that I really, really love. There's a character in the show called Red Herring, who they keep saying it's Red Herring, and the character himself appears and goes, "That's not very funny." And just, it's wonderful. So like I said, and that's one that was on a lot when I was a kid. That's about when it was coming out. So that's why I have a big attachment to that one. But not a lot of experience with this movie. Like I said, I just don't have a real attachment to it. It came out, early 2000s. So, I mean, I was probably in that in-between period where I was too cool for Scooby-Doo and was just kind of confused why this movie existed. But yeah, it was excited. Like I said, excited to go back and look at it because, written by James Gunn.
I mean, my history with this movie is pretty similar. I know I saw it back in the day, not in theaters. I don't know, TV, cable. Maybe we rented it. I saw it at least once. Because I remember being like, hey, that's Sugar Ray in this movie. Like, actually breaking down that wooden house they're hiding out in. But I mean, I didn't care for it much. It wasn't for me, and mainly because of an age thing. I mean, I was early teenager, preteen, somewhere around there. And, this movie is like ostensibly for kids. At least that's definitely how I felt back in the day. And I just kind of moved on. But I think, like, the legacy of this movie, there is people maybe a little bit younger than us. This movie hit at the right time that really hold a fondness to it. And this is probably the Scooby-Doo that they think of when they think of the character and they think of Scooby-Doo. I have not watched nearly as much of the larger Scooby-Doo franchise as you. When I think of Scooby-Doo, I think of the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You cartoons. I just, you see them on TV as a kid when they rerun old cartoons, and definitely familiar with the property. Saw a few, thought it was fine. I get it. I get the concept, but not really a franchise I kept up with or followed too closely over the years. So going back and revisiting this movie now, man, it was what an experience. I got a lot to talk about here, but before we get into the scenes and performances like we do, talking about all the positives, let's set the stage a little bit. This movie was released June 14th, 2002, made on a budget of $84 million, and at the box office brings in $275.7 million. That's a pretty good hit, Andrew.
It's not bad.
Critically, however, it is not well received. It holds just a 32% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Audience score is not faring much better, if we're being honest here. So we look at this with a critical eye. It was not impressing many people back in the day.
No, absolutely not. Yet not somehow, very clearly evident why, it got a sequel from the same creative team a couple years after this. Because like you said, you can't, the numbers don't lie. And they spell a sequel for Scooby-Doo.
If it makes dollars, it makes sense, Andrew.
It does. Like you said, not a great critic score. Audience score only coming in at 39%. So this is not something that the audience was keen on. I think there was kind of a general, when this movie came out, like at just kind of the cast, at kind of the approach, at kind of just the general tone. Like, I guess people just really weren't flocking to it. Definitely felt like one of those movies at the time. Like, if I'm really trying to remember what I felt like I remember seeing like the poster, the trailer, or the picture of the cast, and was just kind of like, it just felt like one of those movies where they were like, let's take a property and put all these popular people in it and just hope for the best. They've done that a couple of other times with franchises. And like you said, it made enough money to get a sequel, but this is not something that overall has really gotten the fans aren't, rallying for it necessarily. There has been a little bit of a reappreciation of it in the last couple of years, especially now that, kind of James Gunn being the writer and James Gunn being such a hot commodity these days. He's made some comments about the movie and kind of the plans that they had and kind of how things got switched around after they started production and kind of in post. So he's kind of come out and made it clear that like there was a bit of a different plan, maybe a little bit more of a nice
Edgy.
way of saying it. A little bit edgier, but definitely I think something that would have felt a little bit more tonally consistent, at least. Because that is kind of one of the other complaints people had, is the movie kind of feels all over the place. And if you're coming in after the fact and changing things up, it's no surprise at that point. You can probably count on one finger the amount of times that studio interference has helped a movie. So yeah. So I mean, like I said, we can talk about stuff like that a little bit more later. But overall, like I said, pretty straightforward. Audiences weren't really caring for it. Critically, I mean, obviously we still went and saw it apparently, but no. And like I said, the reevaluation has been pretty limited since then.
Well, Andrew, as you have mentioned, the movie is written by James Gunn. He is the sole credited writer. We do have a story credit by Craig Titley, who is a bit of a script doctor throughout Hollywood. He has credits pop up here and there, but likely some elements existed from some script that he originated. But by and large, this is James Gunn's vision, at least as far as the screenplay is concerned. He does not direct this movie. And this is really his first major writing credit. He definitely did his Trauma stuff coming up. He did some script doctor work, some uncredited work. But this is the first major theatrical release, worldwide release from a major studio written by James Gunn. Really launches his career. After this, he has the Dawn of the Dead remake, the Zack Snyder movie, which I always go to bat for. I think it's a fantastic zombie movie, fantastic remake. I mean, every way you look at it, I think it's really delivering. Does eventually get the nod to direct some of his stuff with Slither and Super, two movies that definitely have their cult followings, but did not really hit big at the box office. And then he gets Guardians of the Galaxy. And we all know about how massive of a hit that movie was and really launched his career to a whole new level. I mean, the man is running DC's movie department at this point, and you could trace that definitely back to the success of Guardians. So James Gunn, he's taken off in a big way, and it makes it kind of funny to go back to Scooby-Doo, of all things. is his first big Hollywood breakthrough.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's that little indie Guardians of the Galaxy did a lot for his career, or at least a lot for awareness. Like, I was kind of aware of James Gunn before then. It's like I had friends, horror friends who liked Slither a lot. Super's another one that like's got a cult following. I think our mutual friend Doug mentioned that one to me once upon a time back around when it came out, saying that it was, a kind of kick-ass adjacent situation. But yeah, Scooby-Doo is kind of, like I said, he's got a couple of small things, a couple of indies there. But Scooby-Doo is like the first major nod that he gets. And it's, like I said, it's been an uphill ride for him ever since. And now, like I said, he's got Guardians of the Galaxy 3 just came out. We didn't really do an episode on it, but I think it's safe to say we both really enjoyed it.
Great movie.
And I'm hotly anticipating what he's going to do with Superman. I'll try not to derail our conversations too much by talking about Superman. But yeah, it all starts here. I mean, like I said, you can't really discount his Troma work. I don't want to gloss over that. It's very formative to his kind of evolving as a filmmaker and kind of getting to where he is. You don't get to the top without starting at the bottom. And but this is really the first major studio picture that he gets, which is kind of a surprise. When people would work for places like Troma or things like that, it wasn't always uncommon for you to kind of be stuck there. Like you were the Troma guy. Like, oh, you're one of those types. It wasn't always an easy translation from there to like big studio pictures, and he actually makes that jump. So good for him. And now he's co-CEO of DC Films, and sky's the limit, seemingly.
The movie's directed by Raja Gosnell. Not their first major Hollywood film. Previously have directed Never Been Kissed and Big Mama's House, both pretty sizable hits. Will later go on to direct both of the Smurf films, so this would not be the last time he adapts an old cartoon into a into a feature-length film.
Oh yeah, and I also did Home Alone 3, which, you know, you're just gonna gloss over one of Scarlett Johansson's earliest films. But also worth mentioning, before he did things like that, he was a editor. Did a lot of editing on films throughout the 80s and 90s, including things like Pretty Woman and both Home Alone films, which actually I'm assuming leads to why he gets tapped for Home Alone 3, Rookie of the Year, Mrs. Doubtfire, The Miracle on 34th. Like, you know, no slouch when it came to the projects that he was involved on before being in it. While he was just editing Good Morning Vietnam, I mean, tons of Robin Williams stuff. Definitely. And then, like you said, jumped into directing feature films, had some big hits. I can't help but notice he did not get the nod for Big Mama's House 2 or 3. Bit of a snub, if you ask me. But, you know, you bring that to the world and don't get asked back. That's pretty sad. But like you said, still out there doing his thing. Yeah, this is, like you said, this is after Never Been Kissed and Big Mama's House, which were, like, I mean, say what you will about the films themselves, were both sizable hits. And in the case of Never Been Kissed, kind of pretty well known as one of the more stereotypical rom-coms out there. But yeah, jumps in to take over Scooby-Doo, and then also does get the nod to come back for the Scooby-Doo sequel and the Smurf sequel. So I could only assume the studios were trying to make up for the Big Mama's House snub there.
All right, Andrew. Well, I think it's time we jump into this movie, talk about all of our favorite parts, the positives, what works. You ready to talk about Scooby-Doo?
Yes.
After the world-famous detective team Mystery Inc. solves yet another case, fighting amongst its members leads to their disbandment. 2 years later, the team is reunited when they are all invited to Spooky Island, an amusement park that has been experiencing paranormal events and seemingly brainwashed patrons. Fred, Daphne, Velma, and Shaggy try to solve the case on their own, but it's only after teaming up together with Scooby-Doo at their side that they discover who the culprit really is. I mean, we kind of get the Scooby-Doo formula here. They subvert some things, they mess some stuff, they break from tradition, to say the least.
Yeah.
But, listing your suspects, figuring out who the one person is behind the haunted amusement park, I mean, that's classic Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, they're playing into, like, the setup, I think, is pretty classic Scooby-Doo overall. You know, haunted amusement park, that's kind of the joke. Like, I mean, I remember, Wayne's World once upon a time. Let's just find out who you really are, Mr. It's Old Man Smithers who runs the haunted amusement park, which this movie does the exact same joke by revealing that it's Smithers, the Old Man Smithers, the janitor at the beginning. But yeah, so the setup here, haunted amusement park, pretty classic Scooby-Doo. The flip comes obviously with what we're dealing with here is very real. We'll talk about it more, in depth later. But
yeah.
There's definitely some differences here where we are subverting those expectations a bit, because the true lesson of Scooby-Doo, Chris, is that the humans are the real monsters all along.
Or the small talking dog is the real lesson of this film.
No.
True.
Oh, God.
All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves, though.
Yes.
Before we talk about these scenes, we got to talk about these performances, starting with the best performance of the movie because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off here. Who was getting your Mark Strong Award for Scooby-Doo?
I don't know if this is a hot take or not at all, but I think this is actually pretty uncontested. I am giving the Mark Strong to Matthew Lillard as Norville Shaggy Rogers.
1,000%. Absolutely.
I think that if any one of these characters nails it 100%, unequivocally, it's him. To the point that he continues to voice Shaggy possibly until now. I don't know if he still does it today, but for a decade plus following this show, he took over the role of Shaggy from Casey Kasem and a bunch of Casey Kasem. Originated the role back in the day, but several people have done the role over time, especially as Casey Kasem got older. But I don't think there's. I hesitate to think of anybody else who gets it to the level that he does. He has the mannerisms, he has the attitude, he has the behaviors, the whole being afraid in the moment all the time, and then finally diving in at the end because Scooby's in trouble. Like all of that, he's got to play off of a non-existent dog this entire movie, and he makes it feel, as real as he can. And he's just doing a fantastic job. I think the Rotten Tomatoes review even specifically calls out Matthew Lillard's performance before trashing the rest of the movie, because it really is something that's that good. It's that, like I said, if it's one performance that nails it 100%, it's Matthew Lillard as Shaggy. So, and I'm a big fan of Matthew Lillard. I think he's, dare I say, a little underrated.
A little bit. I think so too.
I think people kind of sleep on him just because they think of like Scream or something. Even this, where you're just like, he's kind of that jokey, that guy. But like here lately, he's done a few more serious turns that I think definitely deserve some attention. You definitely look at his filmography, and it is a great number of Scooby-Doo films, apparently as recent as this year, so he's still out there doing it. But he's got some good stuff there, including a brief performance in Twin Peaks: The Return, which was a welcome surprise, getting in on that David Lynch action, because my life's not confusing enough already. But yeah, Matthew Lillard, man.
Matthew Lillard, Mark Strong Award winner. I'm agreeing with you. He's getting my Mark Strong Award as well. I think the majority of our listeners, the majority of fans of this movie are going to be agreeing with that as well. Just absolutely perfect as Shaggy. It's I mentioned when I think Scooby-Doo, I think that original cartoon. But Shaggy specifically, when I think Shaggy, I'm thinking of Matthew Lillard first. And you could say it's hard to say if he's still the voice of Shaggy. The most recent release was Scoob, that CG movie, which has Will Forte as Shaggy. And apparently Matthew Lillard didn't even know that was the case until they announced the cast on Twitter. And that's how he found out he wasn't going to be Shaggy and was very hurt by that. Very sad. Whether or not they brought in Will Forte just for that one
they did
specific franchise, and he's not going to carry over.
But he's still doing all the direct. Matthew Lillard's still doing all the direct to DVD stuff they do, which is immense.
Perfect.
So he's still doing like I said, I was looking at his filmography here since 2020. His filmography is like half Scooby-Doo movies. So the Scoob movie is a very odd situation because apparently none of the voice cast knew about that or knew it was happening until it was announced, and it definitely got a lot of criticism for being that, hey, we're going to do a cartoon, but we're just going to cast all famous people, when there's a lot of voice actors always get a little frustrated by that because, they're out there making these characters iconic, creating these voices that you understand, and then when the big money starts rolling in, suddenly they get forgotten and they go with big name actors. So Scoob was a little bit of a controversy. But apparently this year we've got Scooby-Doo and Crypto 2 coming out, So apparently we got a Scooby-Doo Superman crossover coming. So I'm going to be checking that out. I got to find out who's voicing Superman.
Right up for your alley there. And you mentioned he's kind of had some more critically acclaimed roles here recently, some more serious roles, but I love 90s Matthew Lillard. I mean, I love the silly, wild teen comedy, teen horror Matthew Lillard. I mean, Scream, Live Her Alone. I mean, so many memorable, not just lines, but the way he delivers the lines in that movie are just so unique. And I think, he was in this forgotten comedy called Senseless with Marlon Wayans. He plays like his roommate, I believe, who has a ton of piercings. He's memorable in that. And I think 90s Matthew Lillard, the peak, though, is SLC Punk. Such a good leading performance. Just such a good little gem from the 90s. And he carries that movie. I mean, he's the lead. And he's great. Matthew Lillard's always been great, turns out. Even the rom-coms he does with Freddie Prinze Jr., they do like 3 or 4 movies together. Things like Summer Catch, he shows up. He's great. I just always love seeing
and
Matthew Lillard
we can't ignore but the 90s classic Hackers. We can't possibly
I
we
did
can't
not mention it
possibly
because
pass that
I
up.
actually have not seen that movie, Andrew.
It is a wild movie where Johnny Lee Miller, Angelina Jolie, Fisher Stevens, and Matthew Lillard. But that's the movie that like originated the I'm in. Like that's the
Right.
So can't ignore that. But like you said, I feel like he's a little underrated. Doesn't quite get the attention that he should, and that's sad. I also read that apparently the Scooby-Doo Superman movie was one of the tax write-offs at Warner Brothers. So now my day went from being amazing to ruined. So thanks, Warner Brothers.
That's a bummer.
Extremely.
Let's talk about the rest of this cast. Let's talk about Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred Jones, the de facto leader of Mystery Inc. Now, Andrew, hashtag PP and all, we agree. Matthew Lillard as Shaggy, absolutely nailing the role. You look at the source material, you look at the live action, you're like, yes, that is a direct adaptation of that character. No notes. Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred, I would not say that about. From the characterization to the voice, I mean, the blonde hair in an ascot is about the only connective tissue that I'm seeing there. And I want to just get that out of the way because I don't think that falls on Freddie Prinze Jr. It's clearly written very differently, characterized very differently, and they cast Freddie Prinze Jr. for this version of Fred that they wanted for this role. And he's here a bit of like a arrogant jock type from high school that maybe peaked in high school and is always trying to stay in those glory days and is very vain. And to that extent, I think Freddie Prinze Jr. is doing a good job, and it helps that he was in all these rom-coms of the time, was a bit of a teen, heartthrob. So, again, for this version of Fred, I can see where Freddie Prinze Jr. is coming in.
And I mean, can anyone fill the voice of Frank Welker?
I mean,
can anyone?
They should have had Frank Welker play Fred, just old ass.
They
Frank
should have
Welker
because I feel like we've definitely mentioned this before, but Frank Welker has voiced that character since 1969. The character's inception. He has, you associate Frank Welker with like Megatron or just monster noises. It's kind of
dog noises,
or dog noises, or creature noises. Like there's so many movies where he's credited as like additional creatures, including this one. We'll talk about that more later. But he has consistently been the voice of adult Fred Rogers from 1969 to now, and it's actually impressive how not old he sounds still doing it now. Because with certain people as they age, you can kind of tell. Like, I love the Adam West animated Batman movies they made, but you can tell Adam West is like 80 when he recorded those. Frank Welker, not so much. Now, to be fair, he's a trained voice actor. It's what he does. It's his thing. I'm sure he's kind of got the secret sauce. Not really secret, I'm sure. It's just practice and hard work because it's hard work. So, you're already casting a pretty big shadow being in a role originated by Frank Welker. But like you said, they choose to do things differently here. And like you said, I think Freddie Prinze Jr. is doing... sorry, there's no way to make this not so much. He is doing exactly what the script is asking him to do.
Sure.
The issues are beyond that. I think for the way they're playing Fred, he's a perfectly good choice. Blonde Freddie Prinze Jr. is definitely a choice. So that's the nicest way I could say that. But yeah, it is. It's like you said. It's not my favorite performance in this movie. It's definitely doing things differently, but Freddie Prinze Jr. is up to the task of what is being asked of him.
And we have Sarah Michelle Gellar as Daphne. Now, at this point, Andrew, we should point out there's a bit of a connective tissue through a lot of this main cast. Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar, they had just done I Know What You Did Last Summer. They get married shortly after this film. And then, as I mentioned already, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard made several movies together, obviously buddies, and they're all cast together in this movie. I gotta imagine that started with Freddie Prinze Jr. Maybe he was the first one to cast, and then the dominoes fall down. And if that's the case, they really stumbled into Matthew Lillard as Shaggy and hit the absolute lotto with that.
Oh, man. Talk about a happy accident. Like,
right?
My God. Like, just the definition, really, of just, like, of finding something that, my immediate comparison, and it's not even really apt, would be like Mark Strong as Sinestro in Green Lantern. Like, Green Lantern as a movie kind of got relatively panned, but almost everybody was like, but Mark Strong as Sinestro, though. Like, everybody was like that. That's like that here, but the legacy goes beyond it. Again, like I said, due to the fact that he kept voicing Shaggy even before Casey Kasem passed away. Casey Kasem stopped doing it a while ago. He has a couple of voice cameos in various Scooby-Doo things, but Matthew Lillard takes over Shaggy, I want to say not long after this comes out. Like, I think he does the live action, and I think he starts doing the voice in like 2005. So, I mean, and now it's 2023. So we're coming up on him having played the character of Shaggy in some capacity for over 20 years now. To the point that, like, that's just crazy to think about. Like,
yeah.
Like, it's just genuinely ridiculous to think that a single person, not the original at that point, but it's like you said, a happy accident, coincidence, karma, fate, whatever you want to call it. I'm certainly glad that happened, though. Because we all won for that one.
Now, Sarah Michelle Gellar as Daphne, it's kind of similar to what we're saying about Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred, where there's some connective tissue with that source material. Maybe a little bit more in this case than with Fred, but they are messing with the characterization a little bit. They are adding this kind of romance with Fred, which wasn't a canon thing before this, and they make her kind of fight against the damsel in distress role, which is, a welcome change, you could say. She gets to really get on the action. She talks about her karate training throughout most of the movie, and we get to see that come into play in the form of professional wrestling, but come into play no less. So Sarah Michelle Gellar up for the task, again, of this version of Daphne that they're writing for this movie.
Agreed.
Now, Andrew, as much of a slam dunk as Matthew Lillard as Shaggy is for the Mark Strong Award, that's not to throw shade at the rest of this cast, especially Linda Cardellini as Velma. I think this is also a fantastic performance, and they are sticking close to the source material with the characterization of Velma, and I think she's doing great and really putting in a performance.
Yep.
Not to be backhanded to some of our other cast members we just talked about, but they're kind of bringing the character to their sensibilities, whereas I think Linda is bringing her skills to Velma's sensibilities, if that makes sense. I mean, she's putting on a voice and obviously the mannerisms to become that character, and I think she does an absolutely great job at it. Linda Cardellini has a very impressive filmography, and really bounces around from bit parts to character roles to leading woman roles. All over the place, great career, and still buddies with James Gunn, I'd venture to guess, because she does voice a character in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, voices Lila. If you've seen the film, that is Velma's voice.
Also, it's Hawkeye's wife's voice. If you know,
Yes, that's
blow
true.
past that she's
That
already
too.
in the MCU.
They've
no,
done that. This is probably the third or fourth time that's happened now, right? Someone playing multiple characters in the MCU. It's.
I know one of the Eternals was in Captain Marvel, and there's been a couple like that. Yeah. I do agree, though. I think this is a really good performance. I think if you're looking for the next closest performance that's kind of in the original spirit of the character, you're definitely looking here. Now, what I do find interesting is Linda Cardellini did not inherit the voice of Velma going forward from this. But on Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, Linda Cardellini did play a recurring character called Marcy Fleech, who's called Hot Dog Water for a lot of the show, because apparently she smells like hot dog water. Not very nice.
Okay.
But she plays like a very Velma-esque character who the team interacts with and utilizes in Velma's absence a few times. So I thought that was kind of fun. Little homage there to have Linda come back to the franchise to kind of voice this kind of a side character. But like you said, the performance here I think is really good. It's in the spirit. It's how you're kind of expecting Velma to be. And like you said, this is we understand we're writing a very fine line here with some of these performances, but Velma and Shaggy are definitely the ones that are in line with what you expect, and how you kind of remember those characters being. And Linda does a great job. Like you said, she does the voice, she's got the appearances, she's got the mannerisms, and she's doing a fantastic job.
Fun fact about her career, her first appearance on television was actually on The Price is Right in 1994. She was a contestant, Andrew, and she won a fireplace.
What a time to be alive, man.
I'm sure at the time she was like, my life has peaked. It doesn't get any better than this. And then
now she could buy 2 fireplaces.
At least. Andrew, the cast is a pretty narrow scope. There's a couple more I want to talk about here, but like the main Mr. Ink, that's our main cast of the film. A few supporting key players we got to shout out, like Rowan Atkinson, who plays Emil Mondavarius. He is the man that runs Spooky Island. He's the one that invites them all out there to investigate. And lo and behold, he ends up being the bad guy. Kind of. He gets unmasked and it's Scrappy-Doo. You probably know that by now. But we'll get to it when we get to scenes. But the character, physically, is being played by Rowan Atkinson. Hashtag PP, Andrew. A little underused in this movie. I wish we saw a little bit more Rowan Atkinson. At least we got to flex his physical comedy a little bit more. But the scene where he sits down with Scooby and kind of tells him the business before he ends up being a sacrifice, I think is his best scene in this movie. He gets to flex a little bit of his wacky humor a little bit.
Yeah, I would actually go beyond that. I think he's severely underused in this movie. It's a little odd. You got one of the greatest physical comedians of the 20th century to be in your movie, a comedy no less, and he's just kind of playing it straight for the most part. He gets a little maniacal towards the end, but even then, like it's still it's pretty straightforward. Definitely, especially for Rowan Atkinson, who no matter what you see him in, whether it's Blackadder, Mr. Bean, Johnny English, whatever. It's just a tremendously wicked sense of humor. Just a extremely funny man. There's a bit I saw that he did that popped up on, I don't remember if it was TikTok, but it's him and Elton John doing like a sit-down interview, and this must have been the late 80s, early 90s. And the entire joke of the interview is that Rowan Atkinson is incensed that his name is Elton John and not John Elton, because Elton is a last name, not a first name. That's the entire That's the entire gag of the entire bit, and it's wonderful. And Elton John plays off him perfectly. And it was one of those things where I watched it. And I was like, man, like I feel like people don't talk about how funny Rowan Atkinson is enough. Like obviously, people know who he is. People know who Mr. Bean is, but he's a tremendously funny man. And I'll just say it. I'm not saying this against the film or anything. The movie doesn't use him well. And it could have done a lot more with him. It's not his fault. I'm sure this was just a bit thing, and who knows, maybe the longer versions or the more extended cuts that they've referenced, he had a little bit more to do. But here, he's just playing kind of the impetus for the events of the film. He invites, like you said, Mr. Eaton to the island, and kind of oversees this place, and ultimately is revealed seemingly as the leader of this kind of weird cult thing they've got going on. But like we said, all is not as it seems. That scene you pointed out, definitely the high point. It's definitely one of the only scenes, I think, where you kind of hear him talk for more than a few minutes. Almost everything else is a big group scene with all of Mystery Incorporated. It's one of the only scenes where he's one-on-one with a character, and of course, it's the CGI dog that he has to play off.
Right.
Nobody for, but but doing the most with what he's got. And like I said, just baseline. I'm never sad to see Rowan Atkinson on my screen. He's somebody that when I was a kid, I didn't think I really got it, but as you know, an adult, I went back and watched a lot of his classic material, and I'm like, this dude's funny as hell.
Miguel A. Nunez Jr. plays Voodoo Maestro. Alum of the show, Miguel is. We talked about him back on our Street Fighter episode where he plays DJ. And I know we shouted it out back then, but I gotta do it again. This man, in 1985, appears in both Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, and The Return of the Living Dead. One is an entry in arguably the most high-profile slasher franchise of all time. The other is a highly regarded cult classic zombie film that still ranks very high amongst all-time great zombie movies. He did those in the same year, Andrew, back in 85, and his career was just getting started. His line at comic conventions, it's got to be tremendous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And not just is he in those two movies, he's essentially the standout of both of them. And maybe not Return of the Living Dead necessarily, but he's definitely the standout of Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Like, his character is one of the most memorable characters, dare I say, of the entire franchise. They gave him a very unique look. They give him a very unique kind of gimmick, and it stands out. Like
the gimmick of having diarrhea, is that his gimmick?
But also his look, just his attitude, what he does, and just the way the character is, and having diarrhea. Because I saw 4, 5, and 6 at Alamo as a marathon, and 4 obviously being the one with Corey Feldman, the final chapter. And then A New Beginning, and then Jason Lives. The Tommy Jarvis trilogy, as it's called. And at the time, I was like, man, 5 is so weird. Like, it's just such a 4 and 6 feel like they go together. 5 doesn't. Which, to be fair, 6 ignores 5. But his character, like, I couldn't pretend that his character wasn't, of those 3 movies, probably the most memorable character of all 3 installments. And yeah, so good for him. And like, the character is not given a name. We're not just calling him Voodoo Maestro for fun. That is literally how he is credited in the movie. I do not think we ever actually find out his name from anyone.
And then lastly, Isla Fisher plays Mary Jane. Andrew, the character's name is Mary Jane, and Shaggy falls in love with her almost instantly. It's love at first sight. Andrew, Shaggy loves Mary Jane.
Oh, is that a Spider-Man reference, Chris? That's really good.
James Gunn with those comic book references.
Yeah, yes. Like gotta definitely working that in. It's nothing else, that's for sure. I love that. Even we'll talk about it more in scenes, but the scene where they're on the beach, there's like smoke coming out of the top of their van
because they're grilling. Andrew.
It's just them grilling, because of course it is. They're not. They would never be doing nefarious, at the time, illegal activities. But yeah, a little heavy-handed there, maybe.
But she's a lot of fun. She's a good pairing for Matthew Lillard's Shaggy. They get along great. I don't like the trope where they introduce a love interest for a character and it's just a gender swapped version of that character. And I don't think this quite gets there. They have a lot of similar interests. They both like Scooby snacks, but it doesn't feel like female Shaggy. It doesn't. It never crosses that line. So credit to Isla for making it its own character.
I agree. Like you said, it would have been easy for this to kind of be a little nothing character, and it's still very much like a side character. But like I said, gets to do a little bit more, and Isla makes the most of it.
And before we move on to scenes, we got to talk about the voice of Scooby-Doo himself. This go round, Scooby-Doo is voiced by Neil Fanning. And Andrew, we talked a little bit about Neil before we hit record because Neil Fanning hasn't done a whole lot outside of this. He gets the nod to be the voice of Scooby-Doo in this live-action film. And I'm not sure what in his resume led to that casting.
I can't even identify something in his immediate films that like connects him to this movie like whatsoever. It is a very, very it's an odd set of movies, and it's an odd set of things, but there is just not that much. And it seems a little odd that somebody I'm not faulting his performance. He sounds very much appropriately Scooby-Doo, but it just, and maybe that was it. Maybe the dude just had a really good Scooby-Doo impression that they decided to run with. So, props. Like, I guess I can mention it now. Scott Inez returns as Scrappy Doo, a character he had voiced in the past. He didn't originate that character, but Scott was also known for voicing Scooby-Doo. So I thought it was odd that they gave Scott the nod to come back as Scrappy, but not do Scooby-Doo. Also, Frank Welker, the greatest voice actor of all time, who is credited here as the voice of the creatures along with Jess Harnell, has also done Scooby-Doo before. So you actually have other Scooby-Doo voice actors in this cast recording lines for the movie, and none of them get tapped to do Scooby-Doo. And it's also not like it was like a celebrity doing Scooby-Doo. Like, it's not like, they were like, here's, Keanu Reeves as Scooby-Doo. Like, they didn't, which that'd have been a heck of a thing. But, so it's definitely, like I said, no fault to his performance. He sounds exactly like you'd expect Scooby-Doo to sound. Maybe not exactly, but it's all fine. But it's an odd set of circumstances that, you have these other people literally in the booth for this movie, and that have done Scooby before that aren't doing Scooby, and you're also not having like a big name do Scooby, so you're not even doing like the controversial thing. So, but props to Neil. Like I said, I think he does a good job. He does get the nod back for the sequel as well. So,
he sounds like Scooby-Doo. I wouldn't know any different.
Right. That sounds kind of backhanded, but the way Scooby looks actually is the harder part for me here. Seeing Scooby as like a real dog, even though it's CGI, is very, very strange. There's a reason he works best as a cartoon. But yeah, like I said, he sounds like Scooby-Doo. You're not really going to know any different. It's just, like I said, a very odd set of circumstances.
Andrew, if I were to ask you what Scooby-Doo's catchphrase is, what would you say?
Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
Okay, that's pretty good. Any others come to mind?
Zoinks? Or is that Shaggy's thing?
That's Shaggy. So maybe you, being such a big fan of this franchise, aren't going to be falling into this trap. But where my mind goes is Ruh-roh. That's what I think of when I think of Scooby-Doo. But Andrew, that's not Scooby-Doo. That is Astro from the Jetsons. That's that dog's catchphrase. He says, Ruh-roh, Rorge. But everyone here...
Are we sure Scooby's never done that, though?
So here's the thing. I went down this rabbit hole earlier.
Uh-huh.
And can you find a clip of Scooby doing Ruh-roh Yes, he does it in this movie, in fact. But by 2002, people have already like confused the two, and they don't draw attention to it. It's the very end of the movie, like where Shaggy and Mary Jane get back together. He does a quick rut-row. It doesn't call attention to it like it's a catchphrase. But people will swear that Scooby-Doo's catchphrase is "Ruh-roh, Raggy," and it's not. He doesn't say that. And like I watched like this compilation on YouTube, and it was like 3 times that Scooby-Doo had said "Ruh-roh," and then they reveal at the end that they actually edited it and they put Astro's "Ruh-roh" over Scooby-Doo. So there's this big Mandela effect thing going, because before I read all that, I could have even told you the name of the dog from the Jetsons. The Jetsons isn't something that I watched very much.
No.
But I know Ruh-roh, and I thought I knew it because of Scooby-Doo. And it doesn't help that they had the same voice actor. Don Messick voiced both characters, and they're
both Hanna-Barbera. Like they're both the same company. Like it's not shocking to me that Ruh-roh could have easily translated from the Jetsons over to Scooby-Doo at some point.
But it's like an established catchphrase for Astro, and like maybe you've heard Scooby-Doo say it before, but it is not his catchphrase.
That is a fun fact. I don't think you called it a fun fact, Chris, but that is a fun fact.
It blew my mind is what it did, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those, like, you know, it's the whole Luke, I am your father. Darth Vader never says that.
Right.
He says, no, I am your father. He's standing right in front of Luke. He doesn't need to say his name, guys. He knows
Luke,
who he is.
you specifically? Let me show you.
I know there's nobody else in the room with us. But yeah, that's wild. That's one of those, like, yeah, I don't even know if that's a Mandela, because like I said, I do think Scooby has said it. I just assume it's definitely a transplant over from the Jetsons, which obviously wasn't nearly as successful as Scooby-Doo was. I mean, the Jetsons is known. But yeah, if you asked me what the Jetsons dog's name was, I probably would have had to sit and think about it. Like, I remember the theme, sort of, so like I would have probably eventually gotten there, but I would have had to think about it. I know Blue Falcon's dog, but I don't know the Jetsons dog.
Does Astro come up in the theme song for Jetsons?
I don't know, but I probably would have just gotten the associations going, and I would have.
Elroy.
George Jetson, Jane, his wife, his boy Elroy.
His wife.
Rosie's the robot. That one I knew. Like, everybody knows the robot.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Don't remember the daughter's name. That's just blank.
Let's sit here and think about it, Andrew, until it comes to it.
Because as we all know, silence is the best thing on a podcast. But no, that's a wild one. I know there was a Jetsons revival like in the 80s or 90s, but there's like a voice actor. His name is I can't remember his name, but he was brought in as like Judy Jetson. That's the daughter's name. And we got there.
You can stop screaming at your radio now. I'm sorry.
Your radio, Chris. What year is it?
I don't know. What do you call it? You can stop screaming at your car's speakers. Do you listen to podcasts from your phone speakers, though, Andrew? Ever?
Is the podcast playing on my phone?
Yeah. Okay. So you're in the car. You got your phone plugged in. You want to yell. You want to yell at the podcast. Are you looking down at your phone, like on your dash, and yelling at that? No, you're yelling like
Chris. The phone's in the car with me. I don't need to
dashboard.
look at it. We're right back to the Darth Vader conversation.
I'm yelling at the source of the audio, which is coming the speakers
from
in the car, which is coming from the. I guess it's not a radio, but I don't know what else to call it. The car speaker system.
Your car's multimedia sound system.
Guy, you can stop yelling at your multimedia system right now. We figured it out.
But I think his name is Roger Rose. I think that's the guy's name. That's his actual name, I think, not like his character name. But he played like Judy's boyfriend on the Simpson revival. But they brought back a lot of the original actors, and there was genuinely like oxygen tanks in the recording studio, apparently, because some of them were that old.
All right, Andrew, that's the cast. Let's talk about the scenes in this movie, specifically the best scenes and our personal favorites. All good stuff here, Andrew. So
Yep.
kick us off. When is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene of Scooby-Doo?
First off, this Sugar Ray erasure will not stand. They are in the cast.
I
of this
mentioned
film
them
for some-
earlier.
Sorry.
Pamela Anderson
Um,
is in this movie too because it is the most 2002 thing ever.
And is Pamela Anderson like the most 2002 thing ever? That feels so strange.
I guess I definitely associate her with 90s, but like early 2000s, I feel
Whatever.
like she's in like
still the 90s.
Scary Movie 3. I think is the one she shows up in. She's doing like this meta awareness, aware of her celebrity cameo type thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like 90s, she's acting in Baywatch and various movies. In 2000s, like she's Pamela Anderson. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've thought about this a lot, Andrew. The eras of Pamela Anderson's career.
we all have. We all have. I'm not gonna fault you for that. But
In 2000,
yeah.
she's in the music video for "Miserable" by Lit. They're all little people playing the song on her body. It's a fun video.
I'm sure.
And then
I'm
she
sure
eats
I
them.
would have appreciated that video immensely at the time. This may seem again a little backhanded for this movie, but I'm actually going to go with our opening scene, which is basically set as as Mystery Inc. wrapping up their kind of existing case. I forget what the exact, the Luna Ghost,
at the
as it's
Wow Toy Factory.
which is owned by Pamela Anderson, who is just trying to make ecologically friendly dolls for children. And the
As
Luna
you
Ghost has to mess that up. Dude, come on. We're all trying to help here. But this is very much like if there's a moment that like the classic Scooby-Doo dynamic is evident, it's here. So we're setting up a trap. We're trying to catch the Luna Ghost. You see the friction in the team here very heavily, but they set up the trap, it goes wrong, and then they eventually kind of stop the monster anyway, which is classic Scooby-Doo by and large. The plan never goes exactly as it's supposed to. And then this is the one where we get a big mask reveal. You get Scooby and Shaggy like getting into all sorts of hijinks, skateboarding across, and Shaggy's got some sick moves, folks. Like, dude's
Very
grinding with
talented.
sparks. While not being able to see, being very clear. So just again, we're nailing Shaggy here. But yeah, so to me, I like this a lot because it's like I said, it's as close as the movie gets to kind of having just a classic Scooby-Doo reveal moment, that classic setup. And the Luna Ghost, I think, actually looks awesome. Like, I think it's a really cool effect they use on the Luna Ghost, who's actually on the main poster of the movie.
Yeah,
The Luna
I
Ghost
took
is
note
the
of that.
background
Yeah,
shadow on the movie poster, even though he's literally not past the first 5 minutes. But yeah, like I said, at the end of it, we get the ghost, we pull the mask off, we reveal how he's able to fly, we reveal why he can glow. Like, we get the whole big classic, old man Smithers, the janitor who was spurned by Pamela Anderson refusing to date him. That's literally the reason given, folks. I'm not making that up, but I like it. It's like I said, it was the classic. And then after this, unfortunately, is where the team kind of splinters and goes their separate ways, which I find odd that they all have their own cars. Like, did you not drive here together? Isn't that how that normally works? They all had like
No,
their
Andrew.
own car to leave in. But yeah, I love it. It's like I said, the classic dynamic on full display here. We got some really cool effects with the Luna Ghost here. Like the ghost is mostly practical. Obviously, the glow and stuff is probably post, but the actual, like, it's an actual person in a suit flying through the air, which makes it feel a little bit more real. The movie definitely leans into CG the further it goes on. So just seeing that all play here right as we started things off, I think it's a strong opening for a Scooby-Doo movie, and then it takes a bit of a turn with just how the movie then proceeds with splintering the team. But for these few minutes, it's good, man.
It's classic Scooby-Doo. It's like they speed run a Scooby-Doo episode, or just show you the finale at the very least of a Scooby-Doo episode of the classic unmasking, as you mentioned, and the first of a few scenes throughout this movie that are a little scary, at least for little kids.
A little bit, yeah.
My son, he's 2.5, was not a fan of this ghost. Was not looking at the TV. He was turning away. And then a few things happened later in the movie, and he had to leave the room. He was like, "This ain't for me."
I love the notion of your son being like, Dad, this isn't for me.
That's exactly how he said it. He said, "Father, look, I know you got a
regret to
podcast
inform
to
you.
do, but
I regret.
I will be.
I regret to
a good
inform you
man."
that extenuating circumstances require me to exit the premises.
Yeah, not a fan. Little spooky. Pushes it a little bit, but it overall, like I said, a very cool effect, very cool character design, and I love how they do the thing where they explain, well, how is it a ghost? How is it lit up? How is it flying through the air? And there's like a practical, real answer to it, and it's got like this suit that he wears that fills with helium that makes him float, and it's funny because it reminds me of like when they do this in the cartoons, because you'll see a monster fly through the air. And then, like, they reveal how it's actually a chain with a hook on it. And they demonstrate it where you can clearly see the chain and the hook. It's like, I saw it earlier. There was no chain and a hook. But, that's part of the fun of the reveal.
I'm not falling for it, Fred.
And it's very efficient because, it's given you right away, which you come to a Scooby-Doo movie for, which is the big reveal. And then it establishes, like, this team dynamic, which we talked about already. It's a little bit different than usual, but especially the infighting going on, and Velma doesn't like that Fred takes credit for her ideas, and Daphne is always a damsel in distress, and Shaggy is the only one. He's really the heart of this whole movie, the heart of this team. Like, he's the only one who's like, guys, we all bring our own special thing to this team. We're best as a team, and he's consistent throughout the whole movie. Shaggy rules. But otherwise, we got this these dynamics set up, and I love the line from Fred because all the press shows up after he's in. The bad guy's been unmasked, and they're like, "How did you do it?" And Fred goes, "Teamwork. I do a tremendous amount of teamwork." And that is a James Gunn line. That is a great comedic line.
100%.
Very funny.
Yeah.
It's a good pick, Andrew. Not surprised you'd go with something a little bit more classic, given your fan, how much of a fan you are of the source material. I'm gonna go with a different scene, but I'm gonna go with the scene because it also feels a little like classic Scooby-Doo to me. And it's when they're on the island, and they all go to investigate the same spooky castle. So they don't mean to all go there at the same time, but all their individual paths lead them to this castle, and they're kind of forced to team up again for the first time in 2 years. And I like the scene because for a good 15 minutes of the movie, a good chunk of the movie, we're just going through these classic haunted amusement park gags, whether it's like, it's like the roller coaster stuff that comes to life, the food that holds Shaggy and Scooby against the wall, the guillotines that are somehow deadly enough to actually kill somebody start going crazy for Fred and Velma, and they got to work together. It's just solid, again, haunted amusement park gags. It's what you're coming to the movie to see, and as many departures as this film takes, and whatever you may feel about it, it still makes it a point to come back and deliver on the goods. And that is never more true than the castle scene, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. This is the hijinks are classic. Like I'm not sure if they're set to music. I don't remember, but this is very much like a chase scene in a Scooby-Doo episode where they're running around and there's some 60s tune playing in the background. But just the way it all builds together, like you said, it's definitely feeling like it's classic Scooby-Doo. Obviously, like I said, the motivations here end up being much more supernatural than maybe intended. But by and large, it is a great scene. It's a great set of sequences. It's not just one scene, I guess, but all of our characters interacting together on their different paths. I like this one a lot. Builds to a pretty good conclusion too, where we kind of start getting the realization that maybe there's something deeper going on here, and it's a key piece in kind of putting together the bigger plot, placed together with some good Scooby-Doo action. So good pick.
And then towards the end of the scene, Andrew, we get all right, hashtag PP here, kind of a gross scene that doesn't land for me comedically. Let's put it that way. And it's where Shaggy thinks that Scooby is challenging him to a burp/fart off, and it lasts like 30 seconds
It's way too
of
long.
Shaggy doing these very dramatic burps and farts. And look, Andrew, I like a good fart joke, all right? But this one, I'm like, all right, this is for the 6-year-olds in the audience. But, look, we're a hashtag positivity podcast. I'm bringing this up for a reason. At the very end of this, he's letting out, Andrew, he's letting out his last big fart, and it's a long one, right? And Daphne walks in behind him. He doesn't realize she's there, and she looks at him with a disgust. And while he is farting, he looks back at her and gets surprised and stands up real fast to stop. And the fart goes whoop, as he stands up. Dude, that killed me.
Oh my God.
I sat through like 45 seconds just with a straight face. I'm like, this is horrible. And then that one last little high pitched note, Andrew, it was worth it. It made the whole thing worth it.
It came back around, folks. It wasn't working for me until it did.
So,
man.
We talked about the tone a bit because I said earlier, like this movie feels ostensibly for little kids. Like they're not sneaking in too much stuff for adults, and it just has that silly kid movie feel to it, you know? For the most part. There are some things that sneak by. You know, you mentioned the smoke coming out of the van, the obvious implication there. The character's name being Mary Jane. There's a few kind of sexual stuff. They body swap at one point, Fred's in Daphne's body, and he says, I get to look at myself naked. Which again, I mean, that is kind of sexual and problematic when you dig into it, but it's clearly meant to be delivered just as a fun, haha, make a kid laugh line, you know what I mean? But you talked about James Gunn revisiting this movie, answering some fans' questions, talking about it, going as far as to say there's an R-rated cut of the movie, but he did clarify it's only because of one joke that was in the initial cut of the movie that he says was misinterpreted by the ratings board and ended up with the R. He doesn't explain it beyond that, but it's not like at one point there was a bloody graphic version of this movie, so don't want anybody to get
sounds
too
like
carried
it
away
was
with it.
sounds like it was a language content situation more than like violence. That's kind
Sure.
of the vibe I got. Like, you know, R-rated for the same reason that something like, say, like Old School is rated R, versus like Terminator. But yeah, he's spoken a little bit about that. He's like I said, he's not dived into too deep he's not really gone super heavy into like what the intentions were, but just really kind of did specify that the film changed to be more family friendly. Sarah Michelle Gellar has also essentially stated this, that like after everybody was signed on, they changed it to be more family friendly. There was definitely some more, they definitely did a little bit more with the body swapping scene, is what she's kind of implied. So there was definitely a change at some point, which is what I'm
Daphne kisses Velma, just to say it explicitly. Yeah. That's
and that is how they swap their protoplasm souls back. Yeah. Why? I don't know.
Sure.
But
that doesn't happen every time you make out with someone, Andrew?
And I hope not. Otherwise, I've looked the same every time. But yeah, he. So James Gunn himself did say that there was an R-rated cut, and like I said, it sounds more like they didn't intend for it to be an R-rated cut. It just kind of got rated that way. And
yeah, it looks like they were
like. Go ahead.
It looks like they were aiming for PG-13, and they were going to lean more into kind of the meta and silly jokes and poke fun at the source material.
A Brady Bunch type situation. Yeah.
Sure. But you look at this runtime, it ends up being 84 minutes. I've got to imagine they had some test screenings. People were like, what are you doing to Scooby-Doo? They cut out anything that's a little questionable or weakening at the audience or meta. You get a short runtime. You get a very lean movie that is all just the squeaky clean joke. So I think that's kind of how we got to this final product here. With the, it's obviously for kids, but toned, you can tell there's something that the script wants to do.
Yeah, there's definitely like lines of dialogue and scenes that like out of context feel a little strange, but when you approach it from a perspective of like Velma is a great example of this. When Velma's like soul or mind or whatever is taken out of her body, the new Velma that's basically just possessed by one of these monsters is obviously designed, like she's now got a low-cut shirt and her haircut's different and she doesn't have the glasses. Like they're clearly amping up the, sexualizing the character, whatever you want to call it.
She's all that her.
But it's never like addressed really. They never, like, it's never used for anything. It's just kind of done. It's clearly something that like I definitely think they would have done more with at a certain point. To the point that James Gunn even said they used CG to remove like cleavage from some of the cast members. Like they really went back and were like, we're going to make this as family friendly as possible. And again, hashtag PP, that's almost never a recipe for success when you start with a certain idea and then mid-production or post-production suddenly decide, oh no, we don't want that. We want to go back. We want it to just be classic Scooby-Doo, which you can't really do after the fact, especially if your whole script is like a meta winking thing about Scooby-Doo. Like, I can't imagine like if somebody was like, recut the Brady Bunch movie to just be a classic Brady Bunch movie. Like, you can't do it.
Sure.
Like, the entire setup of the movie prohibits you from doing that. Because it's this whole, the character's out of time sort of thing. But like, like I said, hashtag PP. It's not usually a great situation when you do that hard of a switch in the middle. But yeah, it is what it is.
Getting back to a little bit more positivity here, there's a line that I wrote down that I think is very funny. And I can see this line existing in a script where they are being meta and making fun of the squeaky clean 60s characters. And it's after Fred's soul, or whatever they call it, is sucked out of his body. And he comes to, and he says, someone must have spiked my root beer last night. Which is just a funny line on its own. I feel like the intention was, again, to kind of make fun of source material, but that angle is dropped from the movie, but I still think that is a pretty funny line.
Yeah, it is.
As well as whenever they come up on Voodoo on the beach, again, the character named Voodoo, Daphne had interacted with him earlier in the movie, so she tells the team, she goes, wait, I know how to handle this guy. And then she walks up and goes, hey, you, what are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. I pretty much love anytime Shaggy's on screen. I think he's just doing that performance by Matthew Lillard is just so good. But yeah, I guess we can talk about our big final reveal where there is an isolated scene that could have easily be played for a joke earlier in this film when Velma is kind of investigating this device they've found. And she's telling this guy she's met about this old story about the team. And in it, we are given a flashback where the team is immensely annoyed by the presence of Scrappy-Doo, much like the fans will tell you they were at the time when he actually appeared. He is very grating. He's on Daphne. He's just not great to the point that they leave him on the side of the road. Now, I could have easily seen that as just being everybody hates Scrappy-Doo gag. That's kind of what I interpreted it as originally. But ultimately, we find out that all of this is the machinations of Scrappy-Doo. It is revealed the villain of this movie is not Rowan Atkinson. It is Scrappy-Doo in a Rowan Atkinson robot. Which, that, to be fair, is a very Scooby-Doo reveal. The fact that it's a robot, not a real thing. But it is essentially revealed that he has a real, genuine, like, supernatural spell / thing that he's going to do that's going to transfer all these souls and people's essences. They don't call them souls, they call them essence. Protoplasmic essence. I think that's how they call it. into his body to turn him into this super powerful creature, and then him and his monsters are going to rule the world. Classic Scooby-Doo setup. It's so, but yeah, ultimately Scrappy-Doo is our villain here, which an odd choice, I would say, to a degree. But the movie does run with it. Like I said, Scott Inez does return as Scrappy-Doo, a role he had done before. And this kind of leads to our big final fight, as it were, between Scooby and Shaggy versus kind of Scrappy Rex, I think he's called in supporting materials, where he turns into this, Scrappy-Doo turns into this giant monster.
And he's so gross looking. That's my only note about Big C. He looks so gross.
He looks so gross. It is absolutely true. We get a couple of other things to this big tune. This is where we get Daphne versus the kind of lucha libre leader of security for this group. She gets some cool moves in there. Does a big, nice scorpion kick I noticed at one point. He puts her in the torture rack and just goes for an elbow drop and misses. And I'm sorry, you go for an elbow drop from 10 feet up and you land on concrete, you've broken your arm, sir. That's where the movie lost me, honestly. Everything, it's
always the wrestling moves. They don't get right in these live action adaptations of 1960s cartoons for you, Andrew.
It's not a clothesline, George. It's hilarious. But yeah. So, and then I think Fred and Velma are dealing with our other kind of pseudo henchmen there. As we're kind of trying to stop Scrappy-Doo from essentially taking over the world. Because, it's the right thing to do. That would be terrible if Scrappy-Doo ran the world. But this is, again, it's more hijinks. It's not really classic Scooby-Doo because we're dealing with a deeply real supernatural threat. Something Scooby-Doo has done very few times. That's something that I definitely tried to look into before. Has it ever actually been supernatural in Scooby-Doo? And the biggest one people point to is Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, because that actually is like a witch. That's one of the few instances where it's actually supernatural. Almost everything else is always somebody in a mask, somebody with a projector, somebody in a suit, that sort of thing. And I love them for it. Don't misunderstand me. I like that. But making it real is a twist. So when Zombie Island came out, and that was, if you ever want your dark and gritty Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is pretty close, because it goes pretty hard on the zombie stuff. But here, it gives us the classic setup at the beginning, and then does dovetail into what seems like maybe a plot. But ultimately, we go pretty hard into this Scrappy-Doo with the protoplasmic essence of these park goers. A heck of a ride, really. We do get a weird tease of a brainwashing video. I don't really know what that's there for. It's kind of, it's like, that's not meant to be, like I said, it's not, I don't know if there was more to do there that got cut, but the ultimate reveal of what's happening makes that seem superfluous at the end of the day. That's the one where you get the very strange video where they're talking in 90s slang. And the one guy looks back and goes, "Word," and then winks. Classic kid talk in the early 2000s. But yeah, this big finale, it's bombastic, it's over the top, it's crazy, and like you said, if it's got all the people doing Scooby-Doo stuff, it's just dealing with a very, very real monster in this case, which definitely makes it a bit of a different scenario.
I think you're right about, that flashback scene with Scrappy you could take as people in real life hate Scrappy. We're acknowledging that. And I think ultimately that's probably why he's the villain of the movie. It's like this meta commentary on this very hated character being the bad guy of the movie, which in a version of this movie that has meta commentary throughout, maybe it lands a little differently than it does in this final cut, where it's just like a random small dog named Scrappy is the villain of the movie.
Yeah.
It's a bit weird. It's one of the main talking points when people go back to this movie. I admit that. But beyond all that, it does give you your fun climax to the movie. They're kind of having their cake and eating it too, where it's actually supernatural, but it's still a bad character in a suit deceiving the characters. And maybe best of all here, at the end of this, Emil Mondavarius, the real Emil, is released from where he's been held captive for 2 years. And you get to see a big, bearded, shaggy-haired Rowan Atkinson crawl out of his little container. And we said already, doesn't get a lot of screen time, doesn't get enough, but just the visual of Rowan with the big beard. Just the guy in a big beard is funny. That's how good this guy is. He just looks hilarious.
He makes the most of everything he's got, and it's just unfortunately not a lot. But it is, that visual alone is very. And then he's like clean shaven the next scene. Pretty funny. But like just immediately is like, oh, I better shave. Goes and deals with that. But yeah,
Andrew,
it's
one of my a style of joke that always gets me is whenever a character, I don't even know how to set this up. It calls a character by a fancier version of their name, and they pretend like it's actually their name. Like Michael Scott calling Jim Jimothy comes to mind.
Yes,
funny. It's cool. It's good. They do it twice here. Rowan Atkinson, whenever he's talking to Scooby, when he's telling him he's going to be a sacrifice, he says, "Scoopert, how are you, my friend?" And the idea that Scooby is short for Scoopert is pretty funny. I assume that's not canon, but either way, it's very funny. And then at the very end, we find out that Scrappy...
that actually is his name.
Is that really his name?
Scoobert. Scoobert is his name. Yes. Like that's actually a thing. He's been called Scoobert many times.
Really?
Yes.
Well, it still was very funny coming out of Rowan's mouth. I don't know what to tell you. Wow, I can't believe that. So Scooby is short for Scoopert.
Yes. I don't know why. Stupid. I don't know where Shaggy comes from because Shaggy's name is Norville, but
I think it's just his hair and
Shaggy.
His beard. Yeah. Okay. Well, the other one that made me laugh is when Velma is explaining who was behind everything at the very end. She says it was all Scrappy Cornelius Dew, and giving Scrappy
check us on this one.
Yeah, is his middle name canonically Cornelius?
The in-universe information listed on Wikipedia says his name is Scrappy Cornelius Dew. I don't know if that comes from this movie. From the movie, like it might be from this, but I oh man. I just, at the same time though, like that's definitely something James Gunn would have like gone back and looked up and been like, they called him Scrappy Cornelius Dew once, better do it.
Now, Andrew, obviously, you know more about greater Scooby-Doo lore than I do, as we talked about. But I feel like the amount that Scooby-Doo has quote-unquote talked has varied a lot across these decades. I mean, I feel like originally it was more insinuated in one or two words here or there. You got the R's, but in this movie, he's like straight up talking. He's doing like full sentences and calling people names. I mean, you understand what he's saying. He communicates, as like has conversations with characters. It seems a little more egregious than like the original cartoon, to compare it to something. As well as things like disguising Scooby to sneak on a plane. Even though other characters in this movie just are unfazed by a walking, talking dog. I'm watching the movie wrong, I know. But they seem to really push that envelope more than in previous Scooby-Doo media. Is that accurate? Or by the 2000s, was this just the state of Scooby-Doo?
I think this was kind of just the state. I think as time went on, the character just talked more and more. Obviously, the original show is very much like an ensemble. Scooby's just kind of one of the characters, but still kind of acting like a dog. As time went on, he definitely became more and more sentient. I don't know. That sounds wrong. He's always been sentient. But like by the 70s and the 80s, like when Scrappy-Doo gets introduced, like you have whole shows where it's just Scooby, Scrappy, and Shaggy. Like they reduce that cast to just three of them. And you definitely see Scooby taking more precedence. Even in stuff like A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, he's definitely like talking and interacting with the characters. So I think that's just something that as time went on, the character kind of became the selling point, or at least the perceived selling point. And so he just developed more personality as a result of that. It's called Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? It's not called Fred Jones, Where Are You? That sounds like a true crime documentary. But it's it is, yeah. So I think that's just the nature of any long-running franchise. You kind of find that thing that you feel is the hook, and it just kind of becomes the driving point. And in this case, I think just as time went on and as the character became more and more the focus, you just saw him become more and more of a main character, and as such, just talk more.
And as far as like him being in a disguise, you first see him in the airport dressed up as an old lady. And when Daphne sees him, she says, "No one is stupid enough to believe that." And almost immediately, Fred leans over to Shaggy and says, "Hey, who's the ugly old broad?"
It's like almost a low-hanging fruit joke, but the delivery saves it for me just a little bit.
Andrew, out of curiosity here, you mentioned you haven't seen this movie much. This was maybe the first time you've ever watched this movie. I'm guessing haven't seen that second one, huh?
I have not. If I have, I remember zero about it. Although like I said, I do know that James Gunn returned to write it. So I would be a little curious if maybe the tone is more consistent, given that they had the success of this film kind of at their backs. I mean, we'll see. I don't know if the curiosity will drive me far enough to watch it, but we'll see.
Well, maybe we will have a chance to visit that sequel on a future episode. Maybe we'll come back to live action adaptations of 60s cartoons or find some other way to get there. But this was the last episode of Cartoon Month. Next month, the month of June, we've got a whole new theme coming your way. Andrew, Terminator, the original Terminator 1, bona fide sci-fi classic. Would you agree?
Yes.
Terminator 2, man, one of the greatest action movies ever made, in my opinion.
I believe that opinion is shared by many.
Every movie in the franchise after 2, a bit of a mixed bag. Not certainly by and large, not as highly regarded as those first 2 movies, but all month long during the month of June, we are visiting every Terminator movie after Part 2 and only talking about the positive, what works in each of those entries. Find some standout performances, find some underrated scenes in those movies. And Andrew, I've seen all these movies at least once. Some of them, but dare I say, I think are a bit underrated. I think we're going to have some gems coming up this next month.
I would agree. I think there are some that maybe unfairly got a little lost in the shuffle, or maybe didn't quite get the attention they should have due to dissatisfaction with other things. But I am excited. I think I've seen all of these at least once. So I'm curious to go back and see. I know I have not watched some of them in a long time. So I am excited to go back in and see what I might be depriving myself of.
That official lineup for episodes is going to be Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, Terminator Salvation, Terminator Genesis, and Terminator Dark Fate. Come back next month for Terminator Month. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTR Cast. Thank you.